Welcome to the first. You have a story. If you look back on your life, you've done things for the first time that no one in your family, in your town, in the country has done. This is Dr. Sandi. You have unknowingly paved the way for others without knowing it or even acknowledging it. This is where you tell your story so that those who come after you can walk in your footsteps to build their own firsts. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bird Mejia. Bird is a shaman. Yes, I said it. She's a shaman. I first met Bird at the No Woman conference where she was running a workshop, helping us to relax and to bring in the spirit of the workshop. Bird is the first in her generation to use her shamanic powers to heal generational curses. She comes from a lost lineage of curanderas, intuitives, and shaman from her indigenous Mexican ancestors. And you will see how Bird used that on me to start bringing out things from my ancestry that I hadn't thought of until I was speaking to her. You can reach Bird Mejia at Facebook/bird.mejia. On Instagram, she's just Bird Mejia. On YouTube, it's Bird at Bird Mejia 2204. Her email is bird@birdmejia.com. Hey, everybody. This is Dr. Sandi. I'm here today with Bird Mejia. Am I pronouncing your name right, Bird?
Got it perfect, yes.
This is my Duolingo Spanish, Bird Mejia. And Bird and I met at the No Woman conference, and she gave an amazing workshop that I participated in. It was a spiritual workshop, and I so enjoyed it. And you fascinated me. So I invited Bird to be on the first with Dr. Sandi. Welcome, Bird.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure being here. I am very excited to connect and chat and share some of my magic.
Yes. Well, start now. Tell us what kind of magic you do and how you go about it and how you got there.
Well, I believe right now we're in a transformation time, and a lot of spiritual traditions talk about it. And some of my ancestry is Mexican and Toltec, indigenous from Mexico. And they talked about a time, they talked that we were in this time of the fifth sun, which was a time, thousands of years of injustice. And if you look at the history of the world, all of our lineages someplace have injustice, right? They've also done studies that trauma lives in the DNA up to 14 generations. So that is a long time, and it keeps getting passed on until somebody heals it. So part of my journey, and if you're listening to this, it may be your journey too, because it's not an accident that you're listening to this. Some of us are being called to be the first in our lineage that actually heals the trauma. So that was unknowingly my journey. So it included a lot of suffering. I was in a toxic, what the word we call it is narcissistic relationship, marriage. And I feel like narcissism, the narcissistic personality disorder, as it's called in the psychology world, is just a sign that the person has a lot of trauma in their lives, and that's how the ego has chosen to protect them. And if you have attracted this into your life, it is a sign that it is something that's in your lineage as well. So for me, it's been a journey of healing.
That is interesting. I had not thought about it in that sense, that a narcissistic person has some kind of trauma that they're trying to. I've never thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so in my journey, I was in a marriage for a long time, and it was painful. I mean, I cried every week, and I didn't know what, when you're in something that's emotionally abusive, a lot of times you don't realize it's really kind of manipulative. And I didn't understand it, but after I left, and I left because I started a healing journey, and go into that in a minute. But um, a little bit after, a couple years after, my mother went into the doctor for a stomach ache, and we thought she was in perfect condition. And my abuelitos, and this is my Mexican mother, they lived into their 90s. So my mother went in for the stomach ache, and she was diagnosed with 4th-stage pancreatic cancer and given 2 to 3 months to live. And
Oh my goodness.
she died 35 days later, and it was a shock. And after she died, the family secret started unraveling, and then I started seeing visions, kind of like spiritual visions came to me, and I was shown that I understood that my mother had been abused, and that I believe my grandfather was very classic narcissistic personality disorder. And I loved my abuelito, like I loved him, because usually someone that has that is they're very charming, and they just know how to get everyone. And this is why it's difficult to be in a relationship with them, because everybody kind of is siding with this other person, right? So what I realized was that, and my mother was abused emotionally and physically, and I also believe sexually. I received that, but they were all secrets. And so what I realized is that the trauma got passed on, because my own father was very loving and kind. So I was like, how did I end up in something like this? Well, because when a woman's pregnant, whatever trauma she's going through gets passed on to the baby. And as a girl, it gets passed on to the eggs, so it gets passed on to the granddaughter. So I actually felt, as the oldest child, I got the trauma of my grandmother and my mother living as a little girl with this trauma. And
Wow.
I repeated the same pattern, and I didn't know. So this is how, if you look in your family at the repeating patterns in your lineage, and this can be dysfunctions in your own life, right? If you keep attracting the wrong man into your life, or you have any kind of repeating pattern, right? And this can also be diseases, right? So if you have a certain cancer that shows up, or diabetes that shows up, or heart disease that shows up, they're all indications of trauma. When it's repeating, it keeps happening over and over, and it's connected to a trauma. So I look at my experience as a gift, because I got to suffer enough so that I had no choice. I mean, I had a choice. I either stayed, and eventually it was going to kill me, and it was already emotionally killing me.
Do you think you would physically have killed you?
Actually I do. I am intuitive. I have an intuitive gift, so this was something else I saw in my lineage. I saw trauma about 7 generations ago on my mother's indigenous Mexican side. And I was shown trauma that was horrific. But I saw that the people that my ancestors were healers, curanderas, intuitives, and it was kind of like it was severed. The tradition was severed. So I've always had this intuitive gift. And my mother always had this intuitive gift. She just knew things. And about the time when I was debating if I was going to leave, so I have a daughter. So, when you're a mother, you really think twice about leaving. And I was struggling with it. I had filed divorce 3 times before I finally actually left, over the years. And
can I ask about that? Because if you get the feeling that you're an intuitive, and you really feel strongly something's going to happen, like maybe you don't know exactly what, but something is going to happen, like your mom, she didn't leave, right? She knew the relationship wasn't right or right for her, but what keeps you there? Is it the children that keeps you there? Because if you're intuitive, you know this, something's. So
yes, and it's interesting when you talk about the intuitive. I actually knew. I mean, it was interesting, even as a young woman, and I was with him since I was young, early 20s. And he was the first man I'd ever been intimate with, all that kind of stuff. And when we used to make love, right, I would have this knowing. I was like, I'm not supposed to be with him. I'm supposed to be with someone else. I had this knowing. But why? Because you stay with the pattern because it was comfortable. The pain was comfortable because I was raised by a mother, and I blessed my mother I'm so thankful for her, but she had a lot of unhealed trauma from all the abuse that she had as a child. So you haven't healed, you're passing that on, that pain. So I didn't feel even safe with my mother. My mother would rage often. She wasn't narcissistic, but she had some trauma from being raised. Like you pass on some of the trauma around it. So it was really normal for me to have some of these characteristics, to have someone just rage and then love bomb you.
That's what you saw. That's
what I experienced because of what came from my mother, and mother is the foundation, right? And I was used to suffering. Like I was used to not feeling safe. It was scarier for me to be free and to be happy. I didn't know what that felt like. It was actually my daughter, when she was 4 years old, she was playing with one of her friends, and she was just joyful and exuberant and wild and free. And I looked at her and I thought, she didn't just get that from her dad. I must have been like that once, because I wasn't like that. I wasn't joyful. If you see me now, like you see me on Instagram, I'm dancing on top of the mountains and I'm smiling and I'm joyful. I wasn't like that. I was that really serious child that was a straight A student, that did all the right things, that was hard to have a hard time laughing. I was really, and I didn't feel joyful. But when I saw her, I thought, oh, what happened? Where did that go? And I actually called my mother. I said, what's it like when I was a baby? She said, you were the happiest baby. You were always laughing. And I thought, okay, so what changed that? And I went back as a child, and I realized that probably since I was 4 years old, I put myself in this cage because I was trying to be perfect, because I was being raised by a mother that had a lot of trauma. And so I didn't know what it felt like. It was comfortable for me to not feel good. And then when you are with somebody that's emotionally abusive, there's a cycle, right? They do this and you don't, it's kind of low key, subtle kind of things. It's not, because it wasn't hitting, there wasn't, at the very end, he almost hit me a couple times, but there wasn't that physical aspect. You don't know. It wasn't until I was debating to leave years later that a coworker came by my office, and she looked at me, and she was feisty, and she knew what this was. And she said, Google gaslighting, Bird. And I Googled gaslighting, and my mouth just dropped. And that led me to start researching.
What was it in the description of gaslighting that hit you? Like, what was it?
It was everything. Like, everything about gaslighting when they talked about was what I was experiencing, right? And it was making them think that you're crazy. And then it went into the narcissistic, was the love bombing, that they rage and then they love bomb. And everything fit. And I was like, oh, and that's why years later, after my mother died, I was looking at my grandfather and I said, oh my goodness, this is classic. And, later my father told me, because after my mother died, my father started talking about some of the things that he knew. And he said, when your grandmother died, your mother was so upset because we went there, and your mother said, of my grandmother, she said, he sucked everything out of her. There was nothing left of her. He sucked everything out of her. And that's classic narcissist, right? That, and it was a pattern. And so I was actually shown, so I come from people, my ancestry did, right now they call it shamanism, but then it would have been a Nawal. It was spiritual people that connected and, could do things with the drum and the rattle and connected to different realms for healing. And that was my lineage that was severed, but I was shown the trauma. I was shown a horrific trauma about 7 generations ago. And I actually tracked it. It was, the Spaniards came to Mexico, and they conquered the Aztec within 2 years. So they thought they were just going to conquer everybody like that.
Right.
And they went to the north, to the northern people. So, my DNA, it shows the people from Jalisco. This is where all my DNA stuff in my indigenous side comes from. And there was a man from Spain, his name was Guzman. And he was so cruel that later the Spaniards brought him back to Spain and tried him and imprisoned him for his cruelty. but he waged a war. There were the people collectively, there were a bunch of different, we call them tribes, right? Like groups of people that had different names, most of them that don't exist today. We think Mexico, just the Aztec. No, just like in America, there was hundreds of different peoples, right? Collectively, they call them the Chichimecas, and he waged a war against the Chichimecas, and they brutally fought him. But within about 1500 to 1530, about 30 years, him and his people murdered about 1 million Indigenous people. And when that happened, because the things that I've seen different visions, just doing like even just drum journeys. And I've seen visions of massacre. I've seen an ancestor sitting in a space where like everything was leveled out, and I felt like Auschwitz, and there was just this sadness. And I've seen in different kind of visions, I'm like, I come from people that were massacred. Like I can feel it. The lineage was cut, and then I was shown horrific trauma that happened. Something that a mother witnessed what they did to the child, and something horrific, and she just checked out. And I was shown after that the man that did it, he was a Spaniard, and he raped her, and I saw the ancestor giving birth. And what I understood was that I come from people that were murdered and the murderer. I come from the raped and the rapist, and that I was to forgive, right? And so that's been part of my journey, is as a uniter of all people, because it's actually in my lineage. But when I was shown the baby that was born from this trauma, and I was shown that from generation to generation to generation, there was this trauma, and it showed up in each generation as it was as rape. And my sisters, we were the first generation that didn't have the sexual abuse, but I was shown that it went from woman to woman to woman to woman and passed on and showed up in the trauma and the stuff that I had. So it's like, a lot of times we don't need to know. And when I was shown that, what spirit spoke to me, and because when I felt it, like I was given it, I actually felt what it felt like for her physically and emotionally. And it was the worst I've ever felt, Sandi, in my entire life. And when I saw that, spirit said to me, spirit's what I call God, said to me, this is most of the people that come to you, this is what's in their lineage, and they don't need to see this and feel this. You're being given this so you understand that this is what is in people's lineage, so you can assist them. And so for me, it's just like this holy, you don't need to know, but it just, I think it's important to understand that a lot of times, sometimes it might show up as depression for people, right? It might be shown up as anxiety. It might be show up in an addiction, a toxic relationship. It shows up different for all of us, right? But it's not, a lot of it's not yours. And I think this is important to know. And you don't need to know what it is and go back and track it unless you're being called to do that. But you just heal yourself. Like you walk the healing journey. When you heal yourself, you cut the chains. And what happens though, is that a lot of times we just shove it down. You're like, I don't want to deal with emotions. Because like it's overwhelming when you're feeling like the blocked emotions and the grief of your mother and your grandmother, like it's all coming through you. You're like the heart portal of it. Like it can be too overwhelming and too much. It's kind of like going through that dark night of the soul. You have to go through that darkness and go through that tough grief and the stuff that's been shoved down for generations. You have to feel it to release it. And what happens for generation to generation, we're like, I don't want to do that. I don't have time. I'm trying to raise my children, or I've got this career that I'm doing, like it's too much. And we just shove. But when it gets shoved down, it keeps getting passed on. So the healing journey is like really going in and doing the work. And I feel like there is one person in the family, in most families, that's the generational pattern breaker. And this is the person, and it doesn't mean that you're superior to anybody else. Like it's not about this, but there's usually one person in the lineage that their heart is strong enough to handle this. And that usually means that they've suffered a lot. Like their heart's been like, in whatever ways it looks like it. A lot of times there's been a lot of hardships for that person. And a lot of times they're the really loving, sensitive, kind of giving person. And again, it is really superior. It's not about that, but it's like when you do this, when you heal yourself, You heal the seven generations before you and after you. And it impacts other members of your family. Don't have to walk a healing journey. They don't have to do any of that stuff, but just the way that you can now show up and the love that you can exude out and being in your power and healed impacts everybody in your family. And honestly, it impacts anybody that you come across. It impacts even the person at the teller at the grocery store, because you're coming with a new energy. So this is really, like, I feel like this is my motto with my kind of my saying and my business is heal yourself, heal humanity, right?
Yeah.
This is the way we heal, because we're also in repeating patterns. We're actually energetically in the same energy as pre-World War II. So
I really, now that you say it, I have not given thought to that before, but I'm thinking as you say it, that there is one person who breaks that pattern and then pass down a new pattern to you. And I'm trying to think as you were talking to me, like, who's this person? And I think it's my great grandmother, who's the one who broke any kind of pattern. She was the one who said, I'm going to do what I want to do, even if other people say I shouldn't do it. I'm going to live life on my terms. And she had a ship. She had I don't know if you call it a boat, but she traveled the different islands. We come from Jamaica, my family. She had a boat that went to all the islands, her boat. And she hired men to work on her boat. And she went to all different islands and different countries buying and selling goods. So she's a merchant marine, right? She goes in, she buys stuff that one country needs, trade it for something else, takes it to, and this is how she made money. And that was not something that was done, you're talking 18 something or early 1900s, because my grandmother was born in 1901. And she had a child in a different island, like different place, each one of her kids, because she would give birth wherever she landed, right? And she was married, and she took no nonsense from any man. She discarded men as easily as she left port, because she's like, I don't have to put up with this. If you're my husband or whatever, and you're not doing what I like, I don't have to put up with this. I just can move on. And I think as you're speaking, she handed that down to my grandmother, who was extremely independent, and my great grandmother died when my grandmother was in 6th grade. She was 12 years old. And she took charge of her family and left school and went to work to support her siblings, her younger siblings. And there's a whole story that I'm going to write about of how she went and got back her youngest sibling from another country and brought her home, because her mom told her before she died, that's what you need to do. You need to be together. And she passed down that power, that women are powerful. She passed that down to my mom. I grew up in a family that we didn't think of men as the most powerful people. It was just up to us. We went to work. We took care of business. We did whatever, even if there was a man around. We didn't leave it up to them. And as you're talking, all of this is just coming back into my head. Like, I grew up because someone in my lineage took charge and empowered us as women to go forth into the world with our own selves. And I've heard that you can do anything you want. I've heard that my entire life. I didn't get what some of my friends were getting, like, you can't do this, or you can't. whatever we wanted to do, whether it was a career that they thought were predominantly male, we're like, oh, we could do that. And so thank you, because I hadn't really thought about it, of who broke that. Maybe I took it to another level because it's been building, but definitely that was passed down to me.
And I love hearing that, because, you know, when I met you, what I was attracted to you, because you are so healthy, like beautiful, like inside and out, but emotionally, I can tell like you were just strong and emotionally strong and healthy and exuberant, right? And you're right, like you get that when someone, if you have a, like that's powerful for the ancestor, like in the eight, like your great grandmother to have broken the chain. Like if it's challenging now, can you imagine how challenging back then to do that? So you come from this, but when like you pass the seed on to the next generation, they can keep doing it, they can keep growing it, and just as you have, like you've enhanced it, you know. But yes, this is what is so exciting. So if you have that in your lineage, like be thankful and pay honor to those that have done that and continue passing it on and growing it. And if your family's still got a lot of mess and it's you, do that work and know that what you're passing on to the next seed generation is going to just keep growing. And this is how we stop the negative patterns, right? And it is like, I feel like it's the most important thing.
And you know, one of the things she passed down was, and it's weird, we didn't have to have children if we didn't want to. I felt that, and I've heard, you know, you can have kids if you want, you can have kids if you don't want, it's your choice. It's your choice. And so I made a choice, and the women in my family might say, we have one child or two, or, you know, we don't, a lot of us don't have like 10 kids. There's always one in the generation that has like a lot of kids to make up for the loss of the others. But these are things I've been given, and I've been empowered my whole life, is the strength of a woman, and that we should always be able to take care of ourselves. That's what my grandmother taught us. We should always know where our next meal, don't depend on someone else or a man to decide where our meal is coming from, or if our kids are going to be taken care of. We are empowered to go out and do that. It's nice to have them, and it's good to have a life partner, but don't be dependent on them for your happiness. So thank you. I really hadn't thought about that, where that came from.
It's so powerful, you know. I mean, that's when, you know, when I my first healing journey was I was trained in Shaktinam yoga, which is like Kundalini yoga, which is a lot of breath work and chanting mantras. So if you know, like, you know, Tina Turner, I love Tina Turner, and if you've seen the movie What's Love Got to Do with It, you'll see when she became Buddhist, she was chanting. Well, she became Buddhist, it was that she started chanting, because when you chant, you're doing sound meditation. And when you're vibrating the songs, they have powerful vibrations. They help heal the subconscious mind. They help quiet the mind. They help heal the lower chakras. It was that chanting that's why we know Tina Turner. That's what gave her the strength to leave her marriage, to step out into the world. What she did back then in her 40s, a woman, rock and roller, out in her heels, dancing. Now everybody, you know, we got J-Lo and, you know, everybody out there in their 50s and 60s, but back then, like, women didn't do that in their 40s. So, you know, that was the pattern. But so when you heal yourself, you heal the generations before you and after you. And, you know, we've talked about the generations after you, but you know, what's really magical is that I thought when I started my healing journey, that's what my teacher would always say. And I thought it was metaphorical, like before you, because how are you going to heal the stuff before you? But Sandi, I was doing, I'm trained in Reiki, but it's not my main thing that I do. But trained in lots of different healing modalities, but I go to a woman that I like to do when I do Reiki. And this was like a year after my mother died. And I thought I'd already like forgiven my mother and done all that deep work. And I lie down and she said, I'm being told that you need to forgive your mother. I'm like, no, I already. And so the whole session ended up being this, like I could feel and a release. And I had this talk with my mom while she was doing the Reiki and I was crying. And I really like did this final like forgiving. And when I did that, I had this vision of my mother here. Because when I've seen my mother, I kind of see her here and I see my abuelita, my grandmother here. I felt my mother and my grandmother come together and hold hands. And I started crying. I said, oh my goodness, we actually are helping the people that are still in the spiritual realms that are choosing to be there, assisting us. We're actually helping them. And I could feel when I forgave my mother, this like I've been forgiven. And so we're actually, because we die, we don't just disappear, right? Our spirits keep living. So it is actually our work that we're doing actually impacts and, is interesting. Like, so years later, I did a pilgrimage to Guatemala to connect with some of the ancestors. And I work with cacao, which is where chocolate comes from, but this is what my ancestors use it. Actually, it's a powerful heart healing plant medicine. And we don't have that property because the way that chocolate is produced now, is separated from the fat content, and the fat content has most of the healing properties. So I was in this ceremony and I felt my grandfather come. And my grandfather, people talk about you can't be with the unwell ancestors, because my grandfather was an unwell ancestor. And he's come to me before, like, I'm so sorry, like a lot of the stuff that has to do with me, like, he's taken responsibility. And I felt my mother and I felt my grandfather come with my mother, and I felt this forgiveness. And then I felt my grandfather come and say, hey, I'm going to assist you, and I'm going to assist your daughter, like she needs, and I'm here to help. And it was so powerful for me because like the healing is really, you really help the generations before you in the spiritual realms. And we don't quite understand that way. And, I don't think many of us will understand until we've actually been on that journey and we see how that is. But it's not a metaphor that you help the generations before you and after you. I feel like it is the most important thing. We spend our money on all these other things and all these vacations, but most of us don't invest in ourselves. Like, what's more important than healing? What's more important? I know when it's time for me to die, to transition, I want to look at my daughter and to know that she is flying and I have broken the chains. It would be so sad for me to be on my deathbed and to look at my daughter and to think, I just passed on all this shit to another generation. And then to transition and get to see how she, like that, I don't want to experience that, right? And I don't want other people that I'm working with that are in my field to experience that.
But how many people, Bird, are thinking of what's going to happen after they're gone? Not many, right? You kind of think of yourself as the here and now, and maybe tomorrow, but most people are not thinking about what legacy am I going to leave behind, right? I've been asking that a lot lately in some of my coaching and my class, like, what do you expect to leave behind? What is your plan for after you're gone? What's going to be left of you? And my grandmother used to say this all the time, like, we're living for the future because what we leave behind determines the future, right? And she used to say, when you die, it sounds like silliness, but when you die is when you know your worth to the world, right? And I'm like, I won't know because I'm dead. But the world knows. The world will know what you did for them and what you left behind. And so she used to go to funerals and we used to laugh as kids, like you're the funeral lady. Everyone who passes away, she felt she needed to go pay homage if they impacted her life.
Mm.
Right. And she always felt people will come to my funeral, and this is how I won't know, but you guys will know what I did in my life. And so when she died, there were thousands, I kid you not, thousands of people at her funeral. And we kept saying, what's going on? Who are these people? Did like the prime minister die? Like, where are these people going? They were coming to her funeral to pay the homage that she gave while she was alive to other people. And so it hit me. This is what she meant. She really poured into a lot of people while she was on earth. And now these people are giving her tribute. Yes, some of them gave it to her while she was alive, but they recognize we will not have this person again to come to call on, to do whatever. And we need to pay homage to that. And it didn't occur to me what they were doing. And so, I started thinking, okay, I need to leave my legacy so other people will know and be impacted by that when I'm gone.
Yes, I love that story and the wisdom of your lineage. It's so like it just touches my heart. It's so powerful.
And you know what? You don't think you absorbed it. Like you don't, your grandparents say stuff to you, your parents say stuff to you, and you don't think it's absorbed. Like you're like, yeah, whatever. And then 10 years later, or 20 or 30 years later, you're like, oh, I get it now. It really did sink in after repetition 10 times, it did sink in. It was just being held in a space for when I'm ready for it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a couple thoughts around that is that, a lot of times we're looking at our legacy on material, like what are we leaving for money, for the homes, for the things. But, it's interesting. Like I like to go to estate sales. I like most of my clothes are consigned.
Me too.
I like to continue, but it's interesting, I go to these very wealthy homes and they have all this stuff. And at the final breath, you don't get to keep anything. Nothing of it matters. But what matters is the seeds and the love and the healing. We give, I think it's interesting, like I can speak as a mother. We think we give to our children all the love and what we give to them, but really what we give to them, the biggest thing we give them is who we be. And if who he is not healed and still has this traumas and the stuff shoved down, that's what we're giving our children and our grandchildren. So a lot of times we're so scared. And I was afraid. This is part of the reason you asked why did I say, because I was afraid of this healing journey, right? My mother's we had a memorial service for my mother like 9 months after she died, and my father spoke, and my father was devastated because he'd been with her since he was 18 years old. He was devastated for months, and he was starting to come through it. And he said, in the Bible, they say you walk through the valley of the shadow
of death.
You walk through it. It doesn't say that you stay
around.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is what when you heal, people don't want to go through the dark night of the soul, but this is, you must feel the grief. You must feel the tough emotions, and it can be really dark and scary, right? And this is why, like, traditionally in the boys used to be initiated, in indigenous cultures and African cultures, and all of us originally were indigenous at some point, but
that's correct.
These were initiated, and they would often actually have to go into the dark jungle to face their fears, to face their shadows, and then they come out of it. And so so I guess, if you're watching this, like, whatever you're afraid of, the cave that you're afraid to enter holds your greatest treasure. So don't be afraid of the healing. It is the greatest legacy that you can leave on. And then the perk and the bonus is that it feels damn good when you've done it. You just find when you're like, I just feel good. I don't need anything. Like, you know, I'm here with my daughter right now, getting her set in Minneapolis. So this couch has been my office and where I sleep. And, you know, I didn't mean to stay here so long. So I have a small suitcase and I was like, what else do I need? I could just take all my stuff in my home, let go of it all. Like, what really matters is who we become and the joy in our hearts and healing the tough stuff and letting go of the legacies. And wanted to say this final thing is that I had mentioned earlier that the energy we're in right now, kind of in spiritual terms, they call it Uranus and Taurus. Taurus is about stability, and Uranus comes in to break the stability. The energy started in the beginning of 2020, and we know what happened in 2020 with COVID, and it is continuing in the middle of it. We got a couple more years. And the last time we were in this energy was pre-World War II. And we know what happened during World War II. So humanity has a choice right now. And we can say, oh, we got to change humanity. But the only person you need to change, that you get to change, that you have the honor to change, is yourself. Look into what needs to get healed, what gets to get healed. And don't be afraid, because when you face that dark night of the soul, that tough stuff, you free yourself. And it feels so, so, so good to free yourself. And this is a gift. And it's the most important. You're going to gift it to everyone in your family, even if you don't have children. It's going to impact your siblings, it's going to impact everybody in your life, your nieces and nephews, everybody. But it's also a gift to the world, because everyone comes across you is going to have. It's helping, you know, even the earth. Like, I have a much stronger appreciation for animals and for our earth that I didn't before. I'm seeing and I'm learning, I'm understanding that, you know, trees, for example, indigenous people call them the standing people. They actually have a physical, they're actually spiritual beings in physical bodies like we are. And it's not just a tree. And there are teachers, and we just dismiss the animals and the plants and no, we're supposed to be keepers of the earth. What we've done is we've destroyed the earth, right?
Oh my God. If you start on this topic, we'll be here 2 hours.
But my point is that when you heal yourself, though, you impact that as well. You impact the earth, you impact other humans. You are the change that the world. We do not get to repeat the past, because in the present, too many of us are choosing to heal and to end.
Bird, when you live in a city, or you grew up in a city, you don't get to see nature in its true form, right? And I would say the majority of the world right now, not land space wise, but people wise, are in cities, right? So kids don't know where their food comes from. It comes from the supermarket. That's where it comes from. They don't know about killing an animal for food. You know, the dogs that you see in the city are pets, right? When I was little, now I feel blessed to have spent my summers in Jamaica, which is a whole different world from Brooklyn, New York, right? Yes. My grandparents had a farm. And that's where I learned you kill a chicken for food. It doesn't come from the supermarket package, like nicely packaged. Someone had to do that to get it there. So some animals are food for other people while they're pets for us, right? I had a pet chicken in Jamaica. I couldn't think of killing this chicken until my grandfather did, and it was dinner. And then I was traumatized, like, oh my God, you killed my pet chicken. It's like, there's no such thing on a farm as a pet chicken, right? So you learn a different reality than what you learn growing up in a city. And so it's not unusual for an adult person to not appreciate the animals because they don't see them, and the trees because you have to go to a park to really see the trees. Or like we have trees on my block here in Brooklyn, and we were devastated when Hurricane Sandy killed all the trees. The salt water came in and killed. We were devastated because the trees, you know, provided shade for us, and they overarched like it's a beautiful picture on it, but it provided shade. And so all of a sudden it was so bright and hot and sunny for us. So we replanted trees, right? But until now, I have a home in Virginia as well, which is on a lake in backwoods country, Virginia. And I get deer coming out on my lawn every morning. I'm in this war with a fox who's trying to kill the fawns, the baby deer, because you don't really see that or have that to understand. We built our house on their property. They were there before us. And now that we cleared the trees and put a house on this property, they have nowhere to hide. They have no cover, no shelter. And so they come out on the lawn and they're eating the grass, and we're changing their environment. But when I'm in the city, I don't see that. I don't get to understand the relationship between the animals, the land, and the people. It's just not there. And I don't know how we can bring that to the city. If we can take kids, you know, there are programs that took kids out of the city every year and brought them out to like more rural parts of New York, and they would learn about horses. And it's just a different lifestyle that you don't see in the city. And I think we need more of that, because otherwise we just don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? You act in the way that you are brought up or what you see around you all of your lives. And unless you step outside of that, you'll never know. So I used to say, what do you mean you don't know where a chicken comes from? Some people just don't know. They don't have that relationship. And we created that. And talking about, you know, the time we're in, we have given power to our leaders, like the Joe Bidens of the world. You're talking about another world war, right? We individually don't create that war. We have empowered people to make decisions on behalf of this country or another country. And so maybe one man, narcissistically, might decide, I want to take over, you know, a certain other country. And this is how it starts. It starts with one person's ego, and they make that decision. And then because we empowered them, they can now go out and create these wars, right? Or stop it. We've empowered some people to stop it. So it is a weird time that we're living in. And we just have to be careful of who we empower.
I love all that. So much wisdom. And yes, and I think we're at the cusp where we get to dream a new world into being, and we get to dream new ways of doing things and start implementing. And you know, all of us, and this is where it's important for the healing journey, because when you do this, you're going to find out that what your passion is, like why you're here for. Some of us are going
purpose
and redo the political systems and rebuild the school system so that, you know, in the schools, like we're teaching the children our connections to the earth. We're teaching the children how to breathe, right? And how to manage stress. And we're teaching the things that matter instead of the things that, you regurgitate and you never learn again, and really not so important, right? So listen to what's calling you, because it takes all of us as a village.
It does.
To to transform the world, right? And some of us, that's
Oh, you froze. I think I lost you. I think I lost you, Bird. So I'm, in case we have to log off, I want to say thank you. Thank you for all that you said today. And I'll try to get you to log back on so we could finish, but I appreciate you. Fine. We lost Bird for a minute, but she's back. And we were just finishing up. We were in a really interesting conversation, and we just want to end it out on a great note. So we talked about empowering other people that we give our power to look after the world. We talked about empowering ourselves and our children and the next generation. So do you think your family really celebrates you? Like, do they understand what you're doing right now, Bird?
no. No, and I think that can be the challenging part when you come from a family. And a lot of us come from families that still have a lot of trauma. So we have parents that have passed on a lot of stuff. And the way I look at it, even like in honoring my mother, is that you take a look at the trauma as original poison, and each poison gets passed on. Sometimes our parents took on such a big dose of poison that it poisoned them. Like they were not able to show up the way we needed as mothers and fathers. And like in my mother's case, it actually killed her, right? But they took on such, if you look at it spiritually, they took on such a big dose of poison, so that the poison that got passed on to us was only a smaller amount. And it's a small enough amount that we can heal it. So I wanted to say that. But a lot of times when you come from lineages that you're the first, a lot of times your other people don't understand that because they still haven't healed yet, right? So a lot of times you're the kind of the black sheep, what we call it in the family, right?
The weirdo.
So, yeah, so if you're the black sheep, you know that you're probably the one that gets to heal it. And they might not appreciate, because I've been on this healing journey for 10 years. I think they're starting to, some of them are kind of, but like, I don't need that, right? It just makes me joyful that it's shifting.
But that's why you're different.
Yes.
Because you don't need it. You would like it, but you don't need it. And so when you're the first, you don't need other people's approval, and you don't need because you're paving your own path. And for the first time, you're the one leading the path. That's doing it.
Yes. And even that, when you talk about needing each other approval, that's another healing journey. Like sometimes when you come from something dysfunctional, I know my pattern was I had to be a perfectionist. As a little girl, I had to be perfect. I had to do the right thing in order to feel safe, to feel loved. So I had to look at my people pleasing. I would have said I'm not a people pleaser, but I realized I'm like, oh my goodness, I really care a lot more than I ever thought about what people think. And in order to do this work, you really have to get to a point where it's like, I can't care anymore. And I just realized that, when I intuitively meet someone, and even for women, there's this competition. Like some of our healing with women is that we're supposed to be in this community supporting each other, and it's become competition for the man, right? Or for the resources. And it's still prevalent. So when I can feel that competition with a woman, my old method was to be super nice and to people please. And now I just am like, my intuition's correct that I feel that. And the truth is that a lot of people are not going to like me, and they're going to talk badly about me. They're going to misunderstand me, but it has nothing to do with me. It's their healing journey. It's what's needed to be healed in them. And so like, even like the people pleasing is a whole journey, because a lot of times when we come from any kind of trauma, when we're healing, some of us have been taught to be people pleasers in order to survive, right? In order to feel safe. So like, that's another thing. So even
that's been my problem, Bird. I didn't get that. I didn't get that people pleasing gene. That one wasn't passed down to me. It was more of do your thing.
Well, because somebody in the previous was like, I don't care. And so my guess is that, my great grandchildren, that they're going to be the same way. They're like, I don't care. But they didn't know that, great grandmother cared a whole lot and had to heal that. Right. Because I think a lot of times the care what people think is because you felt safe. And I came from
to feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah, so because if you have a mother, especially mother is the foundation. If mother still has some trauma, she's not able to give the child that safety. And so sometimes the safety becomes, well, if other people approve of me, that's going to make me feel. We get this, we learn these safe things, these false things that make us feel safe, but are not really safety when we don't have that foundation. So we get to learn that our safety lies within us. It doesn't lie within anybody else.
Amen to that.
Yes. So.
Amen to that. I'm just noticing you have a hummingbird behind you, and the hummingbird is the national bird of Jamaica.
I didn't know that.
Yes, we call it the doctor bird because it's healing. It goes around and heals all the flowers. They're responsible for a lot of seeding and passing on things to the flowers. So they're called the doctor bird. And I just noticed it behind you. I'm like, why does she have a hummingbird behind her? Why do you have a hummingbird?
This one is my drum that I use for some of my work, and I painted this hummingbird. Hummingbird is actually the north direction of the medicine wheel, which a lot of indigenous cultures have a medicine wheel that kind of, in the south, it's about shedding your old stories. In the west, it's about facing the shadow and transformation. In the north, it is hummingbird. And hummingbird represents a couple of things. Hummingbird represents drinking from the nectar of life. So it's joy, right? So even when life is hard, there's still some joy there. Well, how can you drink? And, for my journey, like, I didn't even know how to drink from the neck. I was so used to like the suffering and the low key pain that part of my healing was like, I get to experience the nectar. That's what hummingbird teaches. But the hummingbird also is the ancestors, signifies the ancestors. So the ancestors. So whenever I see hummingbird, I'm like, the ancestors are guiding. And it's interesting because I grew up in a home where there was no hummingbirds. And now I live in Arizona, there's hummingbirds everywhere. So after my mother died, I went home, and there was a day where I was feeling really down. And, people don't, usually my family and people don't know that I'm like, so I kind of keep it like, I'm feeling down. And I was like, ready, like, even with my business, I'm like, I'm just ready just to let this stuff go. Like, I was just feeling defeated. And all of a sudden the hummingbird came. Right. And I knew it was my mom and the aunt, like it signified the mom and my ancestors. I said, okay, thank you. I will continue going on. Never seen hummingbird before or after. But hummingbird is the ancestors, and the ancestors are here with us, guiding us, whether we see them or not, but they're part of our like spiritual team, helping us. They want us to heal. They want us to succeed. They want us. So that's why hummingbird. But I love that hummingbird is a doctor bird, and
that's their name,
because she is a doctor bird. I love that.
Yeah, some kids don't even know it's called a hummingbird. They just say, "Oh, the doctor bird is around," and they're prevalent throughout Jamaica. So they are on the flowers. My grandfather was a bee farmer, and the hummingbirds would even be there, around the bees, like bringing nectar back and forth. So yeah, I thought, oh wow, she has a hummingbird right behind her. But thank you.
You're so welcome. I would love to talk to you about him being a bee farmer. I love that.
Oh yes. Oh yes. I told you I grew up, I was blessed to have the privilege of living in Brooklyn, New York, and having my summers in Jamaica, or in Boston, where it was a whole different world. And so I learned a lot just by going to these different places. And sooner or later, I'll write a book about it because I have some really amazing comparison stories to share, and how I learned things and how I learned to understand that people are different all over the world, but we're the same at the same time, right? We might just have something we call XYZ, and in New York we call it something else, but it's the same thing.
Yes.
And the feelings of people are the same, no matter where. You're going to find good people, you're going to find horrible people all over the world. Every country you go to will have someone who welcomes you, and you'll have someone who wants you to leave, like on the next flight. But thank you for coming on. This was such a blessing to have you. And hopefully we will spread the joyous news, and especially about women and taking action for ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So thank you.
It was an honor, sister.
Come back again.
Yes, I will. And sending so much love to all of you. You got this.
Amen. Amen. This is Dr. Sandi. Thank you so much for sharing your journey on the first, where no two stories are alike, even if the circumstances are similar. Let this discussion serve as inspiration for others to show what's possible, and more importantly, to produce seconds and thirds.